but it didn't look like that to me before. I think I'm much more glamorous than that.
Betty.
Welcome to Words Carry Us, an ongoing series of live stream events featuring readings and interviews from Greenkill in Kingston, New York. I'm Betty MacDonald, writer, storyteller, and host of Words Carry Us. Before I introduce our guest tonight, I'll begin the evening reading from some of my own work. The first one is humidity. Embraced by moist air, humidity surrounds me. An occasional breeze, like a lover's hands. Born and raised in the land of moisture, the weather takes me home. I must be descended from sea creatures or pond dwellers. In the house by the rushing creek, the walls dripped. The dampness was hard on books and furniture. But I could have been a frog's roommate. This one's called procrastination. I've been in this room all day, lying on the couch, writing, watching videos, checking emails, eating, gazing into the refrigerator, gazing at the shimmering heat outside the window. I binge watched the end of a dramatic series about a woman who overcomes adversity, and a TED Talk on procrastination. I have one more. It's called Something Else Hangs in the Air. A small town in the Helderberg Hills, a crowd on Main Street. I don't know what we were doing there. It was unusual, especially for me. I hardly ever left the farm except to take a ride through town on the way to pick up some piece of equipment, some part for the car, or the chainsaw, or the pump, from friends on another mountain, or a bushel of apples from another friend. Regular town folk, regular middle-class people had a lot of stuff. They felt fulfilled, were happy to share the overflow of their lives, gave us jackets, boots, rugs, tables, cars. They admired what we were doing, or what they imagined we were doing, forming a family of disparate women and men and children. Some of them wished they had the guts to do what they thought we were doing. They gave us a St. Bernard, a little terrier called Apple, geese and chickens, a sweet nanny goat who dined on rose bushes. The sole member of her species, Nanny hung out with the dogs and taught herself to bark like the dogs. Later, we were gifted Billy Goat, a husband for Nanny. I rode in the back of the pickup truck to pick up Billy. On our way, he butted me in the knee. Excuse me. My 6-year-old daughter was the only one who could handle him. Fearlessly, she grabbed him by one horn and walked him back to the house when he wandered down to where we sat by the beaver pond, where he would walk up and pee on you. That day, we were standing in a crowd in the little town in the Helderbergs, waiting. I didn't remember for what, when Sonny came up and whispered in that conspiratorial way he had. I could feel his breath on my ear. "Don't talk to that guy," he urged, indicating the stranger who had just asked me a question. Sonny suspected the stranger I was speaking to was an informant. All innocence and anger, I was clueless. Sonny had dropped out longshoreman from Brooklyn, had a background as distant from my middle-class Southern Jewish roots as could possibly have been imagined. My guest wrote, "These are hard times. People feel isolated, gobsmacked by the headlines, disempowered, constantly subjected to injustice. And I believe that art has the ability to mirror society so we can make some sense of what we are all going through." These are the words of tonight's guest, Sean Nixon. Artist, professor of art, author, speaker on higher education, Sean Nixon is the founder of Love of Learning, a consultancy committed to helping create learning environments that lead to self-discovery. Serving as the faculty lead for the Center for Career Development and Applied Learning, he's also SUNY Ulster's Applied Learning Liaison, chair of the Applied Learning Committee, coordinator, and is a SUNY Applied Learning expert. So speaking as a higher education expert, please tell us about what you do.
Thank you, Betty. Was wondering who that was on paper. It sounds kind of interesting.
Very interesting guy.
Yeah, kind of interesting. I wonder how that all happens. Let's think about how that, let's see if I can match up to all those words. I want to really just go back in time a little bit with you, and for you to think about why I do what I do and how I got involved in education and the role in which I've been playing in education. And it really was learning as you do. So I want to just go back really relatively far. When I was very young, my father would walk around the neighborhood, and we were at the university, and they were going through development. So they were knocking down the neighborhood and building these new buildings. And he would take me with him and talk about what the parts of the building are. What is a cornice? What is a bracket? What's an impediment? What are all the parts? And I would get to walk with him, and I was very young. And so that was my early experience of learning hands-on or learning as you do. And so he would quiz me, and the next time we would walk, I would have to say what that part of that building was.
So how old were you?
Oh, probably 7 or not even 8. I'd say pretty young.
And what school was that?
It was University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. We lived right at the campus.
And your father taught there?
He was an assistant professor in the medical school. And so they were knocking this neighborhood down. They had eminent domain. The university decided it should expand. And it was a beautiful Victorian neighborhood. And they did level it. But I learned about architecture, which the point about all of that was curiosity. And so it was like, what are these parts? What makes a building? They have names. I mean, he literally explained the drip on the cornice, like why is there a drip? So that the water would not hit the building, the facade. And so what it does is, what it did for me is, I looked back on that when I got into education, and I said, well, you don't have to go very far to learn that everything you need to know is actually right in front of you. It is in the world that you're in, because I was very fortunate to grow up in a city. So it was very dynamic. It was a college campus, very diverse, a lot of thinking, things going on, performances, different kinds of people. And so that it was an early on development of my curiosity, like how do things work? So I brought that to higher education. I brought that to education. What would I do? How could I teach? Could you teach anybody anything? And so where do you start? Well, you start right in front of you. You start with what you have. And where that went, when I was starting out, it went into hands-on classes. So firsthand, hands-on, practical education. I was very enamored with practical education.
What does that mean, practical?
Practical education is, you think about theory, and I'll just take a quote from Michelangelo.
Oh,
Michelangelo was quoted as saying, "The supreme misfortune is when theory outstrips performance." Right?
Yes.
And look at who was saying it.
Yeah.
Because I also have a brother. We were walking one evening. He's much older. And he was like, "Sean, I'm the real artist in the family." And I said, "Really? How is that?" And he said, "Well, I've got ideas." And I said, "Anthony, that's interesting, because using Michelangelo again, I said, what if Michelangelo just had ideas? Would we even know who he was? Would we even see his work? Don't you have to make stuff to claim that you manifesting your ideas and making them practical?" And he was like, no, you're just making that intellectual mistake.
So were you still 7 at that point?
No, I was much older at that point.
Yeah.
I was probably in 30. So I've made a big leap.
Yes.
I've lived a long time.
Yes.
So a
I
lot
know.
did happen at 7, but not all of that. I had an interesting childhood. So anyway, a roundabout way, I have a great interest and believe that if something is practical, it's accessible. And so that it motivates people and it accelerates the learning process, because they're seeing it happen and they're seeing why it's happening. And one of the big questions that must go through many students' heads all the time is, why do I need to know this?
Yeah, why do they?
Why do they? Why do they? And so if my approach is practical learning with theory, they can see why they can benefit from this thing. So you
Yes.
guide them through it, and you had mentioned the consultancy with the love of learning. It is for self-discovery. So what I'm most concerned about is not what I teach, or what I do. It is what they discover for themselves about themselves.
So how do you set it up so they get to discover, or that they know they're discovering something?
Step by step. But you have something up your sleeve, and that's the process, so that you allow them to have the self-discovery.
Can you give us an example of
Yeah,
that?
sure. In more recent, I'm not 7 anymore. So, okay, we're going to move me up to a little later. What I was doing in a design, with the design program, was introducing them to actual clients. So these are real people in the community. Why was I doing it? Well, one of the reasons I was doing it is I have a strong belief that service is a way to discover yourself by giving. And one way you can serve, at least in the design discipline, is with a designer-client relationship. So I introduced my students to real people in the community, and very accessible people. They were not high-end product making. They were the local, either art gallery or they were local business, and we were making, whether it was print media for them or video for them. And these students became empowered because they could see with this practical relationship, with their skills and knowledge, they could serve someone and they could make a difference for that person with their skills. So applying their skills, they could make a difference in the world. And so that's an example. We do have clients. And because you want to be exposed to a client, because at least in the design discipline, that is a common thing. That is how it works, right? Design is problem solving for
somebody.
For usually someone else.
Yeah.
And so that's why. So what you're doing is you're taking them through a process, but allowing them to see how does communication, what are their communication skills, what are their listening skills, right?
Yeah.
What are their design skills to have an end result. And the end result that they're hopefully after is the result, right?
Yes.
Not what the client wants, but the result. So I hope that gave you an answer.
Yes, I have a question I must have gotten somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
How is education an umbrella?
To what?
I don't know. I guess I didn't get that from you.
I'm not clear what your question is.
That was the question. I don't even know what it means. Shall we move on?
Well, as soon as the image that I got was rain and an umbrella, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, where'd that question come from? You want to try it again, or just move on?
What is the blocker to a love of learning?
What is the Blockers to a Love of Learning is one of my books. It's an ebook. It's on Amazon, and that's much later in education for me. I mean, we're starting with the practical. And as I went through and really thought about guidance, I had to actually look out and pay attention to who was in front of me.
The students.
The students. And so when you're teaching, you have in the back of your mind, if you're fortunate enough, you already have that. But I teach at a 2-year community college. You want graduate students in front of you all the time. You're like, yeah, that's what I want. I want a conversation. I want all this stuff. And then one day, you look out at who's in front of you, and you say, this is who's in front of me.
You stop wanting something else.
You don't want something else. You look at what is reality.
Right.
And they're not graduate students. They're not familiar with college necessarily. They're not. And so you don't want it. You teach to who's in front of you. And so I had an early experience of, like, to serve with love. You know, I'm standing there with these students, and I'm thinking, what is going on here? That's when I had the revelation. Well, that's who's in front of you. You teach who's in front of you.
So I'd like to say, isn't there some advantage to the fact that they're not jaded graduate students, that they're young with fresh ideas?
Not when you're teaching on the other side all the time. Well, just when they get good, they leave.
Of course.
And they go off to the 4-year school.
Right.
So it's like, ooh, shoot. And I have taught at a 4-year school, a 4-year university, and that's really where I started. And developing an art program there. I was the chair of the art program at the University of Bridgeport in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And I did that for a little bit. And then I moved back to the city to go back into the industry. And then I worked my way to Ulster County. But to get back to your question, let's see if we can remember what it was.
Which one? I asked you about the blocker to the love of
Yes,
learning.
thank you.
Yes.
So I was taking a long way to get there. The blockers came later because the reason I'm talking about who's in front of you, I started watching who was in front of me. And then I was like, oh, I'm supposed to motivate them to want to learn. And then I was like, no, because in education, they were all about, well, we've got to do this workshop and we've got to do this theory and we've got to do this to motivate students to learn. And I sat there and I said, I'm more interested in what blocks people from learning, not what motivates them to learn. What is actually blocking them? And so I would watch, and I actually have watched over the years, and I do have some categories like the clever con, the victim, all of these different archetypes that I would watch in front of me because they would play in every year. It's the same it was the same 5 archetypes in my classroom every semester.
Name some of them.
Well, the clever con is one, and that student is, they break your heart. They can break your heart because they fool you. They seem engaged in everything, and then they don't do it. So then you engage with them in a certain way, and then they let you down, and it's like, oh, I was suckered for that again. Then there's a level of victims that are quite interesting. For social economic reasons, many different reasons people play the victim. And then there's also the overly excited student, and that is actually the student that is over anxious and everything can block the learning process.
The anxiety can.
No, not anxiety. There are a number of students that have anxiety, but students that work too hard at looking like they're learning.
Right.
They're not present. They have this method. But there's a few kinds that I've watched over the years. So that led me to looking at not only the students, but what influences are blocking a love of learning. Because I started noticing what I considered a love of learning was non-existent. And I actually feel overall, the umbrella, there's your umbrella. The overall umbrella for higher education is not about a love of learning. It's not. So that's your umbrella.
Okay.
Not about a love of learning. It's a business. It's about a lot of other things, and it's about employment. It's about their own employment. But there's that, we could go into that, we have another hour. So I was watching that, and then I was watching the influences that were blocking it, and they were not the student. They were their friends, their family, the culture, American culture, and I thought, aha, that's what we need to address. We need to really think about that. And so I would like to go in and read one story to give you an idea of what I'm talking about when you start to notice, because I was an advisor. So I'm trying to advise these students, but I need to know who they are. And then I need to kind of get a sense of where they're coming from. And when they're clever, they don't know what they're saying. A lot of times students are talking, they want to please you, and they want your approval. They want to sound good.
Right.
And so you have to listen to that. And so I'm just going to read this from the Blockers of a Love of Learning. And this is a book that has about 7 stories in it. And they come in different categories, and I'm just going to read, if possible, this evening, 2 of them.
Okay.
And one is the parent and the guardians as blockers. And I had found that one of the number 1 influences to students and how they learn was actually the parent. And they're a significant blocker to learning. And we as people would go, what is he talking about?
No.
They work so hard, they love their children, and they want to do all they can for them so that they do well. So I'm just going to read this. It's an early Monday morning. I'm walking down the sunny open corridor of my college. The walls currently exhibit a show of self-portraits. The eyes of tomorrow's grads seem to follow me through the hall. I'm en route to my office for a meeting with Skyler. Skyler is a promising student, but there is a non-committal air about him. We are meeting to see why he seems to be having so much trouble completing his work given the fact that his student profile intake shows that he has a big interest in a design career. When I arrive at my office entrance, I see Skyler standing next to a tall gentleman in an expensive suit with gray sideburns and trendy glasses. I wanted to come and speak with you about why Skyler is not getting an A. He says that he's uncomfortable with some of the demands of your course, the gentleman says. Oh, you are, I ask. I'm John, Skyler's father, he booms. Good morning, both of you. Nice to meet you, John. Should we talk in my office? I lead them into the sunny office. I offer them coffee and water, and I invite them to take a seat. They do not sit. John is dismissive, even irritated. Skyler looks glumly at the floor, as if he is hoping to blend into the scenery or disappear. I sit at my desk. You say he is uncomfortable with some of the demands of my class, I begin. We bought Skyler his own MacBook Pro with all the best software. He is always on it. John takes a step in front of his son, partially obscuring my view of Skyler's face. Skyler, can you tell me what you mean? Is it the assignments? I crane my neck around John to face Skyler directly. Well, it's really deadlines, Skyler says, looking uncomfortably at his father. I just have trouble sometimes getting them done by a certain amount of time. You always make us hand in work by certain days instead of when we finish it on our own. Look, let's cut to the chase. I have a plan. We have a plan for Skyler. He is going to major in design and then go on to work in my friend's advertising agency. Right now, we don't need anything getting in the way of that plan. John's voice seems to lift higher and higher in pitch. Skyler, can you tell me more about your plan to work in your dad's friend's advertising agency? I ask, straining to get the student to look at me. Sometimes it seems as though you're not terribly interested in the course material. John interrupts again. Well, Skyler was always good at Photoshop, and so that is why we think it's the best route for our career for him. Now I'm lowering my head closer to the floor to make eye contact with Skyler. What inspires you to work for this particular advertising agency? What are they known for? Skyler freezes like a statue before shrugging his shoulders towards the linoleum. His father interjects, oh, they have all the best clients. They're really big. Not some rinky-dink operation or anything like that. Skyler, do you see yourself working there? I ask. Finally, John stops talking. We both stare at Skyler for what seems like an eternity. His eyes begin to fill. Where'd he go? Fill with tears. And we look at him as if it is an eternity, and he almost inaudibly announces, I don't know.
Wow. All right, so that's from real life, right? That is.
With this story and another, and all the ones in the book, they're composites of all real stories.
Right.
So there were many Skylers
like that
over the years.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, it is. And I could go on about that, how common it is, and it is heartbreaking.
So you have another story from
I
that
do.
book that you want to share with us?
Mhm.
And this is another blocker.
This is another blocker, and it's in a different category. And the category, is this good, David? It's lovers and partners. We all know so much about them. Georgia came from a family of addiction. So at 16, she sought emancipation. She completed her GED and enrolled herself in our local community college. With no mentors, no guidance counselor, no adults to help her design a path towards a successful academic career, she soon realized that supporting herself and attending college as a minor was overwhelming, and so she quit. A few years later, Georgia met fellow Sizzler Steakhouse employee Shelley. They were both servers on the worst shifts. Most of their time was spent hoping for customers to arrive while marrying the ketchups. As they got to know each other better, they bonded over mutual dreams of starting their own business or getting out of food service entirely. Eventually, they fell in love and shared an apartment. But Georgia had not forgotten that initial motivation to better her circumstances. She couldn't shirk the dream she once held of being the first in her family to graduate from college. She had hoped that the entrepreneurial bug she shared with Shelley would provide a better future. However, their dreams had been bounced around so many times that they began to fade out of fatigue. So Georgia started making plans to return to college. Although at 16 she was unprepared for higher education, now that she had spent a few years out in the real world, she felt ready. At first, her lover seemed to be in favor of the idea of Georgia going back to school, but over time, as her own ambition gave way to complacency, then jealousy, Shelley stopped being outwardly supportive. Although Georgia did not notice at first, Shelley found subtle ways to undermine her choice to go back to school. Don't you think college is a waste of money? I mean, you are going to come out of it with a bunch of debt and no guarantee of a better job, Shelley would say. Georgia would return from classes filled with enthusiasm and excitement about the prospect of earning a college degree, but Shelley was quick to throw out the casual, "Watch you don't get a big head, and you don't count your chickens before they're hatched." Over time, these put-downs would only increase. One evening, Georgia came home and immediately began working on a paper that was due the following day. Shelley wanted them to go out to a club and hang out with their old friends from Sizzler, but Georgia refused to budge from her studies. "You need to put that damn laptop down," Shelley blew her top. "You are not fooling anybody. You and I both know you ain't gonna finish that program. It's too hard for you, and in the meantime, you are ignoring the people who care about you. Stop trying to be somebody you ain't." Then came the ultimatum. "Boo, it's me or school. Take it or leave."
That's a big barrier to learning, for sure.
That's an ultimatum.
So
So
I
want to just tie them together so that
Okay.
you understand why I chose these. So with Skyler, that was the parent guardian, helicopter parent. Skyler and his father, we had one extreme. Skyler had surrendered any role in the plan for his future. So that is a common thing. They just sit there
Right.
and say, "Tell me what to do, show me whatever." I find that almost one of the saddest things to watch young people in college when you're at a point where it's like, this is self-discovery, this is you, and they're willing to do this. It would not surprise me if something like, and I hope I'm not insulting any culture or philosophy, it would not surprise me in the future if many young people would go along with arranged marriages, that their parents would say, "This is who you should marry," and they'd say, "Okay." Because you literally look at young people and say, "Wake up. You don't have to do what your parents tell you to do." But they've been They've been given that from their parents for so long, that's all they know. And so they don't understand what happened. So I've been watching this. We're talking about the archetypes. I've been teaching for a long time. And it's tough. So that was one extreme. He surrendered his role. Georgia is the other extreme. She has deliberately brought in no outside assistance for her plan. That's the other extreme. She doesn't trust adults. Remember, she came from a family of addiction, and she wanted her emancipation, and she was going to go out there and do it at 16. So that's that other student that's young. They're going to do it. They have this plan. And she was going to do it alone. So what she ended up doing, if you were following these stories, she finds a life partner and thought that this would bring her a sense of stability. That's what we think can happen. And she discovers that her partner does not share the same values when it comes to education and career. Again, a common, you can think of yourself, anyone listening is maybe going, mm-hmm.
Oh, yes, for sure.
Oh, yeah. So romantic relationships can have a great source of encouragement and support. I do believe that. Unfortunately, romantic partners can also be possessive, dependent,
Jealous.
dependent on you being dependent on them. Now you can say it.
Jealous.
Yes. High maintenance energy vampires, manipulative, and wind up blocking our love of learning.
So,
Right.
Sean, I think we get it. And I want to have time for you to talk about Mind the Gap,
Okay.
your other book. You said
Yeah, sure.
You had examples, you had tips. What was it?
I do.
You have 8 tips for designing
do.
a
The
custom gap year.
Let me find my tips.
Talk about that.
Oh, there they are. Yeah, I have another one. The other book is Mind the Gap, 8 tips for designing a custom gap year.
A gap year. So this is unusual, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody else is doing this.
Gap years?
I mean, people are doing gap years, but nobody's
Well,
suggesting there be a plan.
Because I've been watching how people learn
Yes.
and what blocks them. And we've just looked at 2 stories, just read 2 stories, how one person was not prepared and the other one is being guided by their parent. It's looking at students that do come after they've had time off between high school and college or another part in their lives. And they tend to be very strong students, very strong. I've had a number of students over the years that came in young and they were not prepared or did not want to be there and they did not do well academically. They weren't doing it, and they left. A couple years later, they returned. And, they returned married or with a child, and they were A students. So they were that little maturity that happened and life experience. And they're generally always much better students if they've had a gap year, if they've taken a gap. And so that's what I believe in. I think that it would be really helpful if we got away from scarcity as a mindset in higher education. And we're scared to death that we don't get enrollment. We can't lose a single student, we have to keep them. You'll get better students if you encourage them to take a gap year. Harvard encourages their incoming class to take a gap year.
Take a gap year.
Absolutely, and only they take in 3,000 students because they get over 30,000 applications. Only about 70 of the students take them up on it. So they do.
Say that again.
About 70 students take them up on the gap year between when they applied and when they will enter.
And it's your experience that they do better.
They do better.
Okay.
They do much better. And it's a maturity. It really helps them, not rush into something. So the gap year thing, what I decided to do with it is talk about myths.
Myth?
A myth.
Myth.
There are myths around taking a gap year. If you don't go now, you'll never go.
Right.
Right? Gap years are for rich white kids. Right? That one. All these things. If I'll be behind. Like, will I forget
worried.
math?
People are very worried about being behind.
Behind. Will I not have the same friends? Like, will I be out of my cohort? So there's all these things, and we have a lot of support in our society. There are many parents that will actually say, no, you need to go now, right?
Because if you don't go
If you
now,
don't
you'll
go now,
never
you
do
go.
it.
And then you also have to go to college, because if you don't go to college, you won't make as much money. So there's a lot of scarcity and fear embedded in higher education that I don't think is helpful for developing a love of learning. And that's
Yeah.
unfortunate, but that's the structure. And our society is complicit with it.
So
And
I
we do it.
want to
So
hear
here you
those
want to say
tips, yes.
So I'll get to the tips. Okay. Tip 1, dream big. Yes. Because when people come up with plans and dreams, they're either monumental or minuscule. They're either too big to achieve, or they're too small and they'll get bored and won't do them. But I still want people to dream big, not I'll just stay at home and watch video games. You know, I had a student that did it.
Right.
I met them and they said, I spent a year watching video games.
So I want to have time
Okay.
to
You want me to
talk
shut up?
about your art show that's coming up. So if you could just give us some examples.
You
of
want the tips?
I want the tips.
I'll just do the tips. Okay.
But you don't need to explain them because
I
we
won't
get
explain 'em.
it.
You'll hear them. Plan it out. That's number 2. Number 3, research your requirements. Number 4, use your 6 degrees of separation. Number 5, get a coach or a mentor. Number 6, gap with a buddy. Number 7, be of service. Number 8, document your journey.
Excellent.
So those
Yeah.
are some of the, you want to talk about art now?
Yeah. Do you?
Does the audience have a question?
Does the audience have a question? I think not.
Are they getting tired of me talking about education? Aren't there a few people? There's always a teacher out there somewhere.
Somewhere,
Mhm.
yes. So you have a show coming up.
I do.
You just did a show at Unison a month or so ago, and you do this wonderful thing of offering your showgoers, your, what do you call them, people who come to your show?
Attendees.
Attendees, right. The attendees. It's funny how a word like that can just disappear. And you offer them art supplies so that they can react.
Yeah. I do. We have paper, pens, markers, chalk, all kinds of writing material, drawing material. And it's really a lot of fun. We ended up in the last show, which was this one. I'm going to put this up, David, which was the COVID book. And I spent over a year and a half doing the drawings and putting them together. And there were 48 drawings in this book.
And what I read was that they're like New Yorker cartoons, but they don't need a caption.
Not always, but they have some good ones in here. So yes, I'm very interested in audience participation. So we started with education, that was hands-on, practical. I do like the audience to have an experience as, participating in it. So we really had people doing a number of really nice. One of your previous guests did a wonderful drawing, Carl Weldon. He did a drawing for the show, so a lot of really fun drawings. And also we were fortunate to have a writing group respond to the drawings as well. So they participated by choosing one and then writing about their response.
Lovely, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you'll do that kind of thing
We're
for
going to
the
do it
show?
again at the Lace Mill. So the next show is at the Lace Mill in Kingston. It is on Cornell Street. And we will have drawing material, supplies and material, and people will be encouraged to respond or draw whatever they want. We are in a tough time, so there's no lack of material.
And that show opens next Saturday, August 6th,
Mm-hmm.
from 5 to 8 p.m.
In the Lace Mill West Gallery.
in the Lace Mill West
So if
Gallery.
you come in the back of the building, the entrance this time will be in the back of the building. You'll come through Stuart Bigley's show. Stuart, if you're listening, sorry I paused. But Stuart Bigley will be in the main gallery. You can walk through, take a look at all of his work. He has some really nice work, a lot of work. and then you can go through the door and come into the West Gallery, which is the room that I'll have my work in. So I hope everybody shows up and draws something and has some fun.
I'm
These
coming.
These are new drawings. I'm wearing one. It just went off the screen. But I'll just lift up if anybody can see this. This is one of the drawings I'm wearing. And if you were so fortunate to see the sparkle video, they really don't sparkle.
They don't.
No, they don't sparkle.
I was looking for sparkles.
But this is one, and now it's kind of interesting that this is the shirt I'm wearing, this is the drawing on the t-shirt. The title for this is called Higher Education. So that was the inspiration for this. You must think I really have this thing about higher education, but
I
don't.
think you do. You can't talk me out of it.
Okay.
Sean, it has been a pleasure to have you here. I enjoyed so much your reading and fascinating things you do. Tonight's guest on Words Carry Us from Greenkill has been Sean Nixon, artist, professor of art, author, speaker on higher education. The opening reception for Sean Nixon's show is at the Lace Mill West Gallery. It'll open next Saturday, August 6th at 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. And attendees, as Sean just told me, will be given art supplies and encouraged to respond to the exhibition. The current exhibition in the Greenkill Gallery, where we are live streaming from, continues for the next month, for the month of August, and features artists Brett De Palmer, Gary Mayer, and B. Ortez. The show is entitled Juxtaposed. The exhibition runs through Saturday, August 27th. Exhibition hours are from 3 to 5:30 p.m., Tuesday through Saturday. To make an appointment for viewing, call 347-689-2323. Located at 229 Greenkill Avenue in Kingston, Greenkill is a public arts performance and education space. For more information about exhibitions as well as live stream and live audience events, email us at 229greenkill@greenkill.org. As always, I'm grateful to David Schell, who organizes and directs and makes things happen here at Greenkill. Our thanks go to Shirley Hoffman-Warren, who composed and performed our musical theme, and Jason Warren, who made the recording. Many thanks to you for tuning in and for watching us on YouTube. And special thanks to our in-studio audience tonight. Our guest tonight on Words Carry Us from Greenkill has been SUNY Ulster professor Sean Nixon. Thanks to you for tuning in and for finding us on YouTube. I hope you enjoyed Words Carry Us for July 31st, 2022. I am your host, Betty MacDonald. Greenkill out.